Swap, guys, you've planned this so well, and of course, Twitter does not cooperate. So this is the Elon era of Twitter Spaces.
Yeah, we got unlucky on that. Sorry everyone for the late AMA. We got some problems with Twitter Spaces.
Yeah, I don't think that you guys can take any blame for that.
Yeah, I've done a Twitter space recently, and it was the exact same thing. And we ended up on Discord.
Yeah, big thanks, guys, for setting us there with the tech issues. Yeah, I think we'll give maybe just 1 minute just to let people join with the new link and stuff, and then we can kick things off.
I mean, in these times, you guys remember Clubhouse?
Yep.
Yes.
So you think we're going back to Clubhouse with Twitter Space not working anymore, Darren?
I mean, it could be an option.
Okay, great. If you guys are ready, we can start things off. First of all, thanks for joining us today. We've got Cyrille, the co-founder of Swaap. We've got Paul, co-founder and CEO of Morpho Labs. And we got Darren, co-founder and CEO of IPOR Labs. So a pretty heavy hitting panel today. So we're going to be discussing the DeFi 2.0, 3.0, where we are in the innovation cycle and everything around that, basically. So I think maybe a good place to start would be, for those who aren't familiar with Morpho and IPOR, would you guys mind giving a brief intro to both organizations? Maybe Darren, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, sure. So IPOR is, we consider it a base layer protocol for the DeFi credit markets, or a foundational level protocol. So it consists of two things. One is a benchmark interest rate. You can think of like an algorithmic LIBOR or so forth for DeFi. And on the other side is a suite of interest rate derivatives. So it's quite relevant nowadays. So if you think of, the really big banking collapses, they're tied to two things. One is duration risk, which is linked to term structure. And then, on the other side is the IPOR index. And the other side is interest rate risk. So it becomes a very relevant kind of theme in today's market.
I think you're muted, Paul.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. So, I'm both CEO of Morpho Labs, and we're building the Morpho protocol. So it's a lending protocol that is based on existing lending protocols such as Aave or Compound. So basically, we're introducing an optimization layer that provides an optimized experience of like Aave or Compound by matching users peer-to-peer and increasing their rates. We currently have 600 million of TVL, and we were launched like 6 or 9 months ago. And excited about this chat, especially on the subjects that are planned, and can't wait to start.
Awesome, great. So I suppose the first question kind of centers around the DeFi 1.0 cycle. So obviously we kind of started off with your basic DEXs, your lending, your staking. But how has the evolution from DeFi 1.0 to 2.0 impacted the decentralized finance landscape? What do you think are the kind of most significant advancements in each phase?
Maybe I can take this one, start. So one of the big things is, if we think of DeFi 1.0 and maybe like if we're looking at 2017, you had the idea of utility tokens, but you didn't have really any application. Right, so this idea of a utility token becomes like this frequent flyer mile for an airline, but if these frequent flyer miles then are fungible between any airlines, it's not really useful for anyone, right? So one of the big kind of 2.0 innovations, I guess, is the governance tokens and how they function. First of all, the liquidity mining narrative, that's really kicked off by the Compound governance token. And then you can think of more innovative ways to capture, liquidity and value in things like the V-curve model or like the Badger DAO boost or other kind of, either productive models or governance models. So it's really actually the shift from the narrative around a utility token to the actual conceptualization of it in a module.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, totally agree on that.
Yeah, fully agreed with Darren. I think the 1.0 essentially showed it was possible to build like financial products on chain and a financial ecosystem. And 2.0, I think, was also very aligned with like the bull run. It was about like accelerating this and trying to attract more and more users towards it. And so, yeah, utility tokens and how to use them was and models, innovative models around that were a key driver of this adoption of DeFi 2.0.
Yeah, I kind of back everything that has been said here. The other thing I would say is that not everything about 2.0 is to be kept, in my opinion. Like we've seen a lot of innovation in like around token design. So May DeFi 1.0 was mostly about protocol design because there was no protocol at all, and that's great. And then DeFi 2.0 has been, you know, more about abstraction layer, management layers, etc., but also token design layers, which I think we've probably went a bit too far into at some point, and we probably need to get back to fundamentals. So obviously, I back what was said before, but just want to, you know, add a little bit of shades on this. But yeah, and excited to discuss 3.0 as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and let's kind of jump straight into some of the 3.0 questions that I have here. What sort of role do you guys think that institutional adoption, regulatory compliance is going to play in the development of DeFi 3.0? And I suppose adding on to that, what projects are you following that are working on bridging that gap kind of between you've got your traditional finance, highly regulated, and DeFi?
Yeah, I think maybe before answering this question, we need to think about like, okay, what do we want to do with DeFi and DeFi 3.0 in general? And to me, DeFi 1.0 was around like, okay, proving that it's possible to build financial products on chain. DeFi 2.0 was more, I think it was okay around like providing utility tokens and attracting users into the system. And now for me, DeFi 3.0 is about building the blocks that will make DeFi the new financial infrastructure of the world. And so I think that given this, I mean, if you have this vision and this objective, you need to think about how you can gain institutional adoption in the long run and how you can work with the regulators to do something that's sustainable. And that's both sustainable and that also works with the DeFi infrastructure and doesn't that does comply with the values of DeFi, which are the decentralization, the composability, the fairness. And yeah, I think we see a lot of projects innovating on this issue. But yeah, first I wanted to frame this because I think it's a very important topic.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah. Okay, no, I'll go then to add some color to what Cyrille said. I think there's another aspect on top of this is like DeFi 2.0 also introduced like very, very large code bases into DeFi, and like because we had like some sort of ultra composability, especially around utility tokens, it introduces like a large amount of lines of code, which inevitably, you know, leads to a large smart contract risk. And I feel like DeFi 3.0 is also like as we define it, of course, in as we want to define it, but it is also here to go back to fundamentals in some way, and you know, design more well thought primitives that are going to be here to actually remove the unnecessary and just focus on building what's best for the user as a mechanism, while having like the simplicity and the the technical readability and primitivity of what is needed for not being hacked. And I think it's especially important to mention that when you think about like what happened last week, where you have the Euler hack with an extremely brilliant team, in my opinion, that got hacked, even though the code was audited and the team was serious about the code, which I think reveals that DeFi cannot scale in terms of like number of lines of code. And I think the challenge is, how do you put enough thought and efforts into designing a system that is sufficiently clever and at the same time not too verbose to improve current DeFi. I don't know if that was clear, but yeah, I think there's a lot of going back to what's essential, but doing it better than what it was previously done in DeFi 1.0.
Maybe I can jump in here also before. I think there's some things that, Paul, you pointed out about the engineering that we'll probably touch on later, but I'm really interested in actually what both of your protocols do, from a fundamental level, so, Cyrille, when we met up in Denver, when we first discussed kind of this, hangout, I was really excited to talk with both of you guys because I think, Paul, I said in your talk in ETCC last year, and Cyrille, we met in, Barcelona, and all of this kind of back and forth. But what I really liked about the protocols is that we're looking at what are the fundamentals of, let's say, the DeFi 2.0. Let's look at the, the base AMM, for Uniswap, which is huge. It's, it's extremely useful, and it's very inefficient, right? So this, X times Y equals K leads to impermanent loss. There is, it's a beautiful, simple construct, but it also leads to, basically people building, we can maybe call them 1.5, 2.5, or maybe 3.0 constructs, which is, hedging the impermanent loss. And I guess, Swap's value proposition is rewriting the AMM construct, so that this isn't an issue, and that's going back to the fundamentals. And then, Morpho, the improvements for both borrowers and lenders this is an innovation on the interest rate module that makes let's say a better game for both sides. So these are, for me, improvements on the very 2.0 basis, the fundamentals. And this is extremely valuable. And then, for example, Morpho with the IPOR rate. The IPOR is a mid-market rate. It's looking at what is the most efficient or rate in DeFi, and it works very well with a Morpho rate. So we as a protocol really need to see innovations around the interest rate dynamic in particular.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Darren. I totally agree with you. I think DeFi 3.0 is helping institutionals adopt DeFi by coming back to the fundamentals and improving the existing primitives, and that's what we're trying to do with Morpho and Swap. And it's also about like building the products that are like the derivatives, all the complex products that exist in TradFi and CeFi and that don't exist yet in DeFi. And I think that's what you're doing, Darren, with IPOR. So there are other, of course, elements that are required besides making those financial products more efficient and possible. There are some issues on the KYC and the regulatory side that are not yet solved, I guess, and which we don't know how it's going to turn out. But yeah, lots of things to be done in order to gain institutional adoption.
Yeah, some really interesting points there, and I think it's quite funny to look at, even that we're at a supposedly more advanced phase with 3.0, that we're now going back to kind of fundamentals and looking at how that kind of influence adoption, kind of a number of other factors. I suppose the other big topical issue at the moment is security concerns. You mentioned Euler. There's some other kind of well-known instances over the last number of months. How are DeFi 3.0 projects addressing security concerns? Let's say, for example, hacks, exploits, and what innovative solutions do you guys see as being developed to protect users?
So
I
maybe,
think Paul
okay,
should
go
talk
for it.
about that because I think you're best in class at Morpho.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for recognizing this. But we indeed put a lot of resources into security, and and I think I have multiple thoughts on this. So the first one is obviously, okay, code audits, which is, trivial to think about, but it's not about just auditing your code once. It's also about auditing it, having it audited by multiple parties, and also every time an upgrade is done. Like, it's very important that whenever a protocol is upgraded, if it is upgradable, that every instance is audited at least one time, and I would advise for multiple times. Like in the case of Morpho, every upgrade that has happened has been audited at least 2 times by top tier auditors. So that's a lot of money indeed, but that's also potentially a lot of money saved. And so, okay, those are audits, but then you have a ton of like good practices that I think we need to emphasize that are true for any era of DeFi. And then I'll jump very quickly into DeFi, like next generation, and what we should expect from it in terms of security. But obviously, you have like fuzzing, peer review, bug bounties are super important, like Immunify, etc. But what I think is important for next generation of DeFi protocols, and this is something I already spoiled in the beginning, is that code bases, in my personal opinion, should not be too large, and every byte in Solidity program is critical. So each core protocol developer has to be fully aware of every single line of code. And I personally don't believe in modularity in the core protocol, because in the end, if it's a core protocol, it's a single module that is, has a lot of interdependence between every line of code. And so I think no matter how good is your team, if your protocol is too complex, if it requires too many human interactions, it will inevitably at some point, as you do some upgrades, etc., it will inevitably in the long term suffer from some issues. And that's why I'm quite concerned, to be honest, about like some of protocols out there, including like some that have been here for a very long time, is as they require a lot of human intervention to prevent people from market risk. So if you think of lending protocols, for example, they have to update their parameters very often on each of the assets, on each of the protocol, on each chain, and that requires a lot of manual effort, on top of which rely like the security of the protocol. So I think we have to go for governance minimize and sufficiently concise protocols, such that we can go for fully immutable, formally proven protocols, where basically a user, when it comes to the protocol, just like Uniswap, just like when you go to Uniswap, there is no problem. Why do you know that? Is because it's only 700 lines of code. 700 lines of code. It's very, very simple. But also, no, it's very concise, but it's obviously very elegant, but it can be easily formally proven. And I think this is what DeFi should look like in the long run. But again, like, this is a personal opinion. I know this is not shared by everyone in the space, but I believe this is what we should tend to in the long run. And maybe Cyrille and Darren have divergent opinion on this.
I don't know why we would have a divergent opinion on it. I think actually when we were meeting in Barcelona, it was a really nice ETH gathering was a very unique experience to bring different builders together, right? And trading off different ideas and best practices. actually we were able to get a lot of really good information about best practices between teams, right? Maybe something about the IPOR engineers. The engineers, the top engineers on the IPOR team are coming with 15, 16 years in enterprise software development, right? So security and a full test suite is vital for us. So we were talking to one of the ones that's considered a tier 1A auditor, and we were talking about the test suite that we had over the IPOR protocol. This is just to test internally. And I think one of the big protocols was, talking about how they had like something like 50 tests written. At that point, we had over 600, and the auditor said, "Wow," they kind of stopped in their tracks because they were apparently not used to it. And maybe this is an issue with the kind of Ethereum move fast and break things hacker culture. And for example, this popularized I test in production. Well, you really get whether you sleep in the bed that you make, right? So if we're going to build this kind of core infrastructure, it doesn't make sense, right? And I think Morpho, you guys are focused on the formal verification, which is huge. And we're looking at this inside of IPOR. Of course it ups the expenditure level on the auditing side, but from the security standpoint, it makes sense. The only thing that's difficult to swallow is essentially raising a round to pay for the audits, but that's kind of the price of doing business.
Yeah, fully agree with Paul and Darren here. Like audits are super expensive, and there are big pockets of expenses of serious protocols, I would say. But they're absolutely necessary, and we're handling user funds, and we should put as much as possible in order to guarantee that those funds are safe. And that's what we are also doing with Swaap. We only work with top auditors. I want to highlight to users that not all auditors are created equal, and you should be very wary of who is the auditor of the protocol you want to deposit your funds into. And also internal controls are very important to be put in place. And I'm impressed by the number of tests that you have, Darren. We also try to maximize these in our review processes. Regarding like the modularity of the contracts, and the point that Paul was mentioning around like minimizing the number of lines of code in order to have primitives that are as resilient as possible, I fully agree. One thing that I would add on top of it is that probably what we need is to have all the core components of the protocol. Or at least the way we see things at Swaap is that all the core components of the protocol that are critical to security must be minimized as much as possible, and like on-chain with a super high reliability. But maybe the way to scale DeFi and have like more complex products is to integrate portions of code that are not critical, that cannot harm the protocol, and put them, for instance, off-chain, have a hybrid approach with all the control mechanisms on-chain. I mean, this is a direction we're exploring, for instance, at Swaap.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to hear the kind of different approaches, but there's certain commonalities there. I think the quality of the audits is a key one that you raised as well, Cyrille. Yeah, really, really interesting stuff. In terms of kind of other blockers, so obviously trust and security is a massive one. In terms of other blockers for mass adoption in DeFi, I think probably user experience and education is a big one. Up to now, it's been like for non-crypto native people, it's a little bit inaccessible. It's a little bit kind of daunting to kind of enter DeFi even on a low level. In terms of kind of DeFi 3.0, how important do you think user experience is, and do you guys have any projects that you want to kind of highlight that are making decentralized finance more accessible to a broader audience?
So I think I'll start because I'll be very quick. We're very bad at Morpho Labs in working at good user experience in terms of smart contracts. We're very focused on the primitive. This is something like our goal is to make the lending the most to make the most efficient lending primitive in the DeFi space. And to be honest, we have not focused too much into it and in user experience. And it turns out that as a very low level primitive, it's not so needed because you end up being integrated by, for example, smart wallets such as like DeFi Saver, Instant App. We have some community smart contract wallet as well that were built, and like those provide an exceptional user experience. And it feels like user experience in DeFi is so hard that I believe it requires an entire project just for this. And I love Instadap for this because they have a very exciting DeFi management layer. Obviously, it's missing a bunch of protocols to be very complete, but I think they already have a good start. So, okay, just to say that we've not been the best in terms of user experience, whether it's from a front end or a smart contract perspective. But obviously, it's very important for mass adoption. I know that Uniswap, for example, is doing a lot of work into removing every clicks, or Safe is doing the same on their front end. And I think this, in the end, will be bringing mass adoption. But it's I think we are. At least speaking in the name of Morpho Labs, we are quite far away from being really good at it. So I'll leave the floor to Darren and Cyrille about it.
I think we actually have kind of the same approach, I would say. One of our beliefs is that, like, what's really cool about DeFi is that everyone can be focused, every project can be focused on just a single thing and do it super well, and leave the other bricks of the value chain to others. And I think we at Swaap, at least, we try to. I mean, we have limited resources. We're an early stage project, so we try to dedicate all of our resources to helping LPs be profitable, and that's our objective. So we tend to focus not that much on the user experience for now. I think also that user experience is going to be improved by some key infrastructure components that are not there yet and that are starting to arrive. So ZK rollups, for instance, with super reduced gas fees, account abstraction, those are things that are going to significantly improve the user experience. Also, one of my beliefs is that I'm not sure that people need to understand every detail of a financial product. Financial products are super complex, and I think there's definitely something to be done on more than trying to explain how a primitive works. Trying to explain to users what are what they can expect from a financial product in terms of returns, and what are the risks that they are taking. For me, that's one of the key components that we need to make happen in the industry to provide a better user experience.
So I don't understand, how is it that the two stylish French guys are not focused on the UI, but the American is focusing it on our side? I mean, you guys have very kind of simple value propositions that are easy to grasp. So when I think of Morpho, I just think better rates, right? And Cyrille, I think the pushing on the basically the improved profitability is quite easy to sell. I think actually on IPOR, we have a very strong focus on UI. So I would say that the way that we constructed the IPOR Labs team is extremely well rounded across the entire suite. So across the quants, across the smart contract engineers, across the infrastructure and the data, and across the product from the UI to the UX. I think I told our guys internally, you guys got to stop pushing such amazing things on the UI side, because the community, they'll get a little spoiled and expect all of these things to come all the time. So I think that we're doing a really great job on the UI side and the design side on the IPOR app, and we're doing a really strong focus on education, and we're also failing at it. So why? Because interest rate derivatives, interest rate benchmarks, they're subsets of finance that people don't really understand so well, even if you come from finance. So it's much more difficult, for DeFi users. So for example, we inside of our Discord, we're using Crew 3 for community management, and one of the modules is actually you go through an entire course on Crew 3 to get a swapper badge. And what that course is learning about the basics of trading interest rate derivatives, but it's still a hard concept to grasp. So, one of the best sells for the IPOR protocol right now is DeFi Llama. The IPOR, USDC, USDT, and DAI pools are earning some of the top stablecoin on stablecoin yield at about 7%, across each, or around 40% on the liquidity mining. So in the end, it's just the yields that are selling it. It pains me a little bit because we're really focusing on the problem that we're trying to solve in the market. But in the end, it's like selling a car. When you go to the dealership, most people ask, if the dealer is trying to sell you the suspension, the exhaust manifold, what's the fabric on the steering wheel cover, but really the person wants to know what color they can get in it, what kind of fuel efficiency, and does it go fast? So we're talking about very different things. So in the end, the consumer, or the end user pitch is very difficult to get. But I think, both of you guys have very clear and simple to grasp ones, and IPOR is not so easy.
Yeah, and I think two quite interesting points raised by you guys there. One, yeah, when you're dealing with complex financial products, it's difficult to perfect the UI, and kind of how do you deal with that? And then on the other side, the kind of Web3 philosophy where you just focus on one thing and everyone's a collaborator, not a competitor, and you can kind of let others do the parts that you can't do. So I think there are really interesting points there. When we think of crypto, we think about communities. Like, crypto's been driven by community since the very early days. Same for DeFi protocols. How do you think, kind of with DeFi 3.0, that community governance and involvement will change? What kind of, or do you guys see any kind of projects or organizations that are utilizing the community really well in new or innovative ways at this stage?
So I would say maybe target more like the participants that are long-term contributors and the most relevant to the projects. It's probably something that has started to happen with DeFi 3.0. And I think you can already see that around airdrop mechanics. Like, you can see some protocols innovating on the airdrop side to try to really reward and involve the right people from the start. I think Hop, for instance, was a good example regarding that. When they did so Hop is a bridge, and they did a very interesting airdrop with Sybil proof mechanisms. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd say about the same. To be honest, I think like involving communities is very hard. Like, at least I don't have the right intuitions on how to do it correctly. That said, I do agree with Cyrille that lately we've seen, like, whether it's with Blur or other mechanisms, like, in incentivization done the right way. But I would say that's more, around usage rather than, like, the innovation has been more around like how to get people to use the protocol and to bootstrap the protocol rather than to how to contribute. And I think this is like I've not seen any projects like being able to actually bootstrap contributions in a very sustainable way, except for the OGs like MakerDAO. And yeah, I think we yet to explore this area. It's by nature it's very chaotic. Like, it's hard to come up with models that are sufficiently general to processize every DAO and make it like operationally efficient. And to be honest, I see decentralization of operations more as a cost rather than as a value. Like I see that, okay, again, this is a personal take, but I see that I see a lot of value obviously in decentralizing the financial stack. But when it comes to strategy and when it comes to human intervention, decentralizing is maybe a little bit, overkill sometimes. And also, yeah, is not always necessary, in my opinion. It's like, for example, the deployment of contracts. Like, why do you need a vote to deploy a contract while you could just say, hey, I'm deploying it myself, and then I'm asking for the DAO if the DAO is willing to take ownership of it. But like, I feel like there's still a lot of things that are more in the sense of a garden theater rather than true decentralized and helpful, useful governance. And I think, as an ecosystem, we have to make progress on this to, define what is the true value added of involving communities and how do we do it the correct way such that you don't come up with having a bunch of like fake or not so relevant communities. And I think it's very, very hard problem to solve. And unfortunately, I don't think we've solved the main, issues of that.
I agree, we haven't. And, it's funny, coming back from East Denver, so I think I saw some people tweeting about it, that it was a lot of people coming from DAOs complaining about how inefficient DAOs are. And so, Paul, I agree with you. And, this is kind of the, I think even Vitalik tweeted about it, right? The, what is it, conflicts, or I can't remember which word he used, but, the embrace of decentralization, but, the speed of centralization. These are different trade-offs. So in IPOR, we're very quickly evolving into a DAO, and we're going through a staged decentralization process. And it's going to be messy, but it's quite exciting. We started with a growing community, created some different roles, and there's been this kind of different users in the IPOR Discord that are called IPORians, and these guys are like the keepers of the DAO. First of all, they were jumping in, dissecting the docs, extremely helpful in helping out other users. Then we launched something called IBI, which is IPORian Basic Income. So it's this basic income that's coming in tokens from the DAO, now monthly, and it's using LlamaPay vesting contracts, this bespoke implementation, but they're essentially working for the DAO. And then, IPOR protocol is extremely complex, so it's more like these tribes or committees around different decisions will be designed, right? So one is liquidity, mining, and emissions. The other is the quant models around the around the risk management, around the AMM design of the swaps. Another one will be data propagation if the IPOR rates go cross chain. So I think we'll develop more kind of a committee-based approach, or discipline-based, and it's evolving, and it's not very clear how it's going to evolve, but we have the basic principles.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think like even looking at DAOs themselves, I think they're probably somewhat of an imperfect structure, but probably the best case scenario for what we've got at the moment. I think we've time for maybe one or two more questions. One of the things that came up prior to the AMA was a question around the integration of real world assets into DeFi 3.0. What projects do you guys see leading the way in terms of like tokenizing physical assets?
I think so. I'll go first because I need to go in a few minutes after this. But I think most of it is on the legal side of things. It's like obviously you have the Securities Exchange Commissions in the US that has been, lately have engaged with a lot of different protocols. And at the opposite, you have protocols like Makers that have done, a huge work around the legal frameworks and how do you actually tokenize all sorts of financial products and how do you onboard them on chain. So I feel like 90% of it is like, to be frank, legal stuff. And then 10% of it is building the right infrastructure on chain to suit the products that we've built that might have different technical constraints due to legal constraints, like maybe permissioning or this kind of things. And if we come to very, very, regulated products, it may happen that we have to build infrastructure in DeFi that is suited for those kind of products. Otherwise, it will just simply not be adopted. So this is my, again, personal take. Not sure everyone agrees on that, and some are more leaning towards like a fully permissionless, the fully permissionless way. But the truth is, like, for some products, there's a legal risk. So I would say that at some point, DeFi will have to adapt for some kind of tokens that are, with underlying securities or this kind of stuff.
Yeah, tokenization of real world assets, it's all issuer risk, right? That's it. I spent 2 years actually developing security token infrastructure before IPOR, and tokenization of these assets is nice to have, but it's not a must have. And the truth about it is, most of these assets, that they're not seeking liquidity. They don't need tokenization because they already have liquidity. So it's actually going to be kind of the tail end of the assets, or maybe the kind of toxic asset, not necessarily toxic assets, but the undesirable ones that are going to be tokenized. It's going to be the simplest ones, like single assets, like a single family home, before it's going to be something more complex. So it's always issuer risk. And then the funny story that came out this week was, JP Morgan's nickel reserves turned out to be a bunch of rocks held by an issuer. So, if you get this in the regulated markets, imagine what kind of things you're going to find, in the real world assets in DeFi. So it's always going to be your issuer risk is going to be your counterparty risk.
Yeah, agreed with the points previously mentioned. I think what maybe an interesting use case for physical assets, real world assets being integrated, is probably like illiquid assets. And for that, I think that projects working on like NFT financialization are pretty interesting, to be able to tokenize or put on chain illiquid assets, such as luxury assets, or any assets that's not liquid, essentially.
Yeah, some really interesting points there. Paul, I know you have to drop off, so big thanks for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it. Some really interesting conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm hopping off now. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
Great. I suppose just one final question, just before we wrap up. I'd be really interested to hear, obviously know a little bit about what Swap's working on for the next few months, in terms of kind of innovation and everything else like that. But I'd love to hear from both you guys just about, what the next few months look like and how you see the work you're doing kind of contributing to the kind of DeFi ecosystem.
You want to go first, Darren? Or
yeah, sure. So we are in the middle of a revamp of the swaps. So one thing will be, so there was a very interesting event, which was this big interest rate spike, a couple times in January, and then also again with kind of the SVB fallout. So we're revamping the spread model with a V1 revamped risk engine, and so this is very, very well in process. And once we have that, we can start extending the durations of the swap. So right now it's only a 4-week swap, but then we're going to get to 2, 3, and 6 months, right? And so this will be very interesting in terms of developing term structure. And going back to what I was saying about the banking collapses, everything tied to duration risk or interest rate risk. Well, that again really highlights the need for the IPOR protocol, because the index is integral in creating this kind of term structure in DeFi, and then the interest rate swaps to manage that rate risk. So that's one. The others are looking at a couple of different, projects that we have in the pipeline. I won't actually go into them now because we have a meeting early next week to prioritize, which one's going first. But they will be quite interesting, in terms of in terms of increasing the efficiency of the assets currently sitting on the side of the protocol, and maybe also, that very nice. We had a very nice early Q1. So jumping up to the number 6 derivative protocol by TVL, number 2 on Ethereum. So that was a little IPOR plug.
Congrats! It's very
Thank
exciting.
you.
Yeah.
Looking forward to see the alpha coming out of the meeting, prioritization meeting next week. And on our end at Swaap, very exciting times as well. So essentially, Swaap V1 was released 9 months ago, and Swaap V1 is with Swaap V1 we essentially proved that we were able to run on-chain market making with almost zero impermanent loss and positive returns, which is not the case of traditional automated market makers. And we've learned a lot with Swaap V1, and now we're moving to Swaap V2. We have worked with researchers in traditional finance in market making for a year now through our partnership with the Louis Bachelet Institute. And we've optimized our model to be able to address additional use cases. And we've also reflected on our architecture to be able to market make to many more tokens. So yeah, we're very excited about what's going to unfold with Swaap V2. Which is going to be live in a few months. So which is going to give more flexibility on the user to choose the risk profile and the return profile of the strategies they want to use, and also be able to bring efficient and passive market making to many more tokens. So more users, both individuals and protocols.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely, Darren, your work seems to be very timely at the moment, given the kind of wider macro situation. And absolutely, V2 is a really kind of huge step for Swaap, and really excited from my side to see how things pan out there. I think that's all the time we have really for today, guys. Really appreciate you both jumping on and taking time out of your schedule to speak. It was a really, really interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And audience, don't forget to follow Swaap, who is the official host of this. We jumped in because there were some issues, but for sure follow Swaap and Cyrille on Twitter, and Morpho and Paul.
And yeah, and follow Darren, of course, and IPOR. Very excited by what you guys are building. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Cheers.